Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Stacy Satan, and I'm with the Housing Alliance of Pennsylvania. Thank you for joining us. Our webinar today is titled Statewide Advocacy for Rental Assistance to Stabilize Low-Income Households and Rental Housing Market. To let you know, this presentation is being recorded and will run approximately 90 minutes, including a question and answer time. We will also send you a link to the recording via email in the next few days or early next week, as well as upload it to our YouTube channel and social media. Attendees will be muted during the presentation. If you have questions for the presenters, please type them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. If you have a logistical question for myself or other Housing Alliance staff, please use the chat feature. The chat feature should not be used for questions for the presenters, only the Q&A. I'll now turn it over to Phyllis Chamberlain, Executive Director of the Housing Alliance, to begin today's presentation.
Great, thanks, Stacy. All right. Welcome, everyone. I hope that you are safe, and I hope that you are as well as you possibly can be. I want to thank you in advance for joining us today. I also want to thank you for working with us so that we can raise attention to the need for housing and specifically rental assistance to be a key part of Pennsylvania's economic recovery response to COVID-19. What we're going to do today is talk about some very immediate advocacy opportunities. We at the Housing Alliance are looking to amplify our collective voices and talk about the need for and impact that rental assistance can have in your local community to make sure that we are supporting the low-income households, specifically renters, who have been impacted by COVID-19. We're going to spend most of our time talking about immediate opportunities. And when I say immediate, I really mean over the next few days and not weeks necessarily. Pennsylvania policymakers are making decisions now and will be over the next very short period of time on how to use some of the funds that have been made available through the federal government. And we want to make sure that some of those funds are used for rental assistance. We're also today going to hear from Leah Salheimer with the Pennsylvania Apartment Association. The Housing Alliance and the Apartment Association are partnering, and we're going to hear from Leah on why rental assistance is so important to the work that they do and to their members. And then we're just going to preview just a little bit about how we want to continue to work with all of you in the longer term. We know that the problems that are resulting from COVID-19 are really big, but we also know that we had big problems before. There are too many low-income households that struggle to pay their rent. There are too many people experiencing homelessness. And there are too many organizations that provide affordable housing and supportive services that were unable to meet the full need. We want to focus on the short term and making sure that we don't have even bigger problems because of COVID-19. But we do want to also take the work we're doing and make sure that we're stronger, we're more organized, we're more strategic to address these problems that are not just because of COVID-19. Let's start by finding out who showed up today. We at the Housing Alliance have a pretty diverse group of folks that we work with across the state. And I want to find out who is here on the call. Stacy, will you start the poll? So before you all answer, remember that you all fit into multiple boxes many times. So please select all that apply, and we'll give you a second to scroll down the long list of potential people and organizations that have joined us today. Stacy, will you close the poll when you see a good percentage of people have responded?
Yep, we're going to give it just another second or so. We're almost there. We have about 70% of the vote at the moment. All right, we're right around 80%, so we'll close it. Here we go.
And you'll show us the results?
Sure.
Great. So not completely surprisingly that the highest percentage is nonprofit organizations who are serving people in need. A good number of landlords, property managers as well. Great. Then we also want to find out what part of the state people are participating from. Stacy, you want to show us the poll? And some of you work in multiple parts of the state, so again, please select all that apply.
All right, we've got about 60 or so percent. Let's see if we can get that a little bit higher. All right, nearly 80% voted, so here we go.
Great. So the Housing Alliance does work with people in almost every county in the state. Looks like we've got some decent geographic representation here today. Stacy, you can close that and we will move on. All right. We want to engage with you all in making the case that rental assistance is a critical component of Pennsylvania's recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. We know that the eviction moratorium, which is in place until July 11th, will not prevent evictions from occurring necessarily. The eviction moratorium was put in place originally by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. Then last week, the governor was joined by the Attorney General to announce an executive order that says that no eviction or foreclosure for non-payment of rent can take place until July 11th. That is a really important step because if people don't have a place to live, they can't socially distance and they can't reduce their risk of contracting the virus. But we do know that the eviction moratorium is only a first step and that there are many households that are struggling to pay rent that are likely to continue to struggle to pay rent. And that's why we need rental assistance. There is an initial estimate from a national analysis that says that 15% of renter households have been impacted by COVID-19 related job loss or partial job loss in that they may have reduced work hours. In Pennsylvania, that equals 200,000 households. We know that low-income workers are overrepresented in the industries that have been hardest hit because of job loss. We know that rental assistance will benefit low-income renters because it will help them pay their rent and avoid eviction. We also know that rental assistance will help landlords, some of whom are operating on fairly tight margins and need that rental assistance in order to meet their own financial and operational obligations, which includes paying their mortgage, but it also includes making both emergency and non-emergency but needed repairs. In the short term, what we're focused on is preventing evictions by increasing the availability of rental assistance here in Pennsylvania. Rental assistance will stabilize the rental housing market, and that includes low-income tenants, and it also includes landlords. That's why we're asking you to join us in advocacy to create a state rental assistance program. What we're gonna do on today's meeting is to talk about the data behind what we know around the need for more rental assistance. But I wanted to start with the very simple message. So here's what we do at the Housing Alliance. What we do is amplify our collective voices so that the stories of the impact of COVID-19 on low-income households are stronger. And there's a lot of information that you all have that's actually the strongest message in terms of what is happening in your local community and how will rental assistance benefit your local community and local economy. We're asking you to call legislators next week to say rental assistance is critical. Senator Killian, who is a senator from Delaware and Chester counties, is intending to introduce a bill to create a state rental assistance program. We at the Housing Alliance, along with the Apartment Association and along with you, want to ask senators to co-sponsor that bill. And then we also want to point out that there is federal funding that has been made available through the Federal CARES Act that could be used for rental assistance. We have a few things going for us. The first is that housing has been a bipartisan issue in Pennsylvania for quite a few years. I already mentioned Senator Killian because he has the bill to create a state rental assistance program. There are actually a lot of legislators from both sides of the aisle that have been supportive of affordable housing policy and funding in the recent past. But I wanted to mention these four, Senators Haywood, Hughes, Vogel, and again, Killian, who have been leaders on the issue of housing and who represent both political parties. We need to make sure that housing remains a bipartisan issue in order to create the state rental assistance program that we are discussing today. What we also have going for us are really good partners. And as I already mentioned, the Pennsylvania Apartment Association is a really great partner for us here at the Housing Alliance. I think we make a really good team, and I think we make a really strong team. And I'm going to ask Leah if she'll share with us some of the work of the Apartment Association to stabilize the rental housing market and why rental assistance is important from your perspective.
Thanks, Phyllis. It's been a real pleasure working with the Housing Alliance, and I think the day that I sent the email and said, can we talk, was a great day for both of us because we realized there was a lot that we had in common and there was a lot that we could accomplish together. So just to start out, my background, my first job was with State Representative Steve Stetler from York County, working for the House Democrats. Then I left and went to be a lobbyist for a number of years. And then my last job was in Congress. So I think, and that was where I had met Phyllis for the first time, working through housing issues. So this is not foreign to me. And I'm familiar with the waiting lists that exist and, you know, the lack of resources available to low-income individuals. And one of our concerns right now is the apartment industry is the lack of resources for working families as well, because this is unprecedented times. We don't have a playbook for this, neither do you. And we just want to make sure that we're doing our best and that our members are working well with our residents. So from the beginning and the onset of all of this, we recommended to our members a number of things. We wanted them to work with residents and make sure that they were trying to devise some kind of a plan to keep their residents at home, especially given the stay-at-home orders that we were experiencing. We wanted them to help develop payment plans with their residents. We did not want them to evict for reasons of non-payment. And we made those recommendations very clear to our members. Most of them were already kind of doing those as best practices anyway during this time. So it didn't take a lot for us to convince them that this was the right thing to do. And I think that they're, you know, right now, as far as we are concerned, April and May, rent collections turned out pretty well for at least our members so far, and they turned out pretty well nationwide with the data that we're getting from our national office. However, we expect that the coming months are actually where we're going to see the most hit, from our industry, but also for individuals where they're struggling. Right now, Pennsylvania is reporting a certain amount of unemployment. However, there's some concerns among the administration as well as some of the state agencies that the unemployment numbers, when you're going through and asking people whether or not they're looking for a job, and some people who work in the restaurant or beauty industry are saying no, because what they expect is that their job will be available to them when this is over and they can go back. But unfortunately, some of those businesses from now until maybe the fall months are going to have to shut down, and those jobs will no longer be available. So our concern is that the unemployment numbers are really going to increase from now until then, particularly again in the fall months when we may see a surge of COVID-19 come back. So that's very concerning for us. It's very concerning for our residents. And we just want to make sure we're doing everything we can. So rental assistance was one of the options that our national office brought to our attention, but other states around us are doing it too. And when we decided to work with the Housing Alliance, we knew that we could come to an agreement, work together, and make sure that we had the best bill possible, not for us, not for them, but for everyone, and that we're really working toward the greater good on this. So I just want to add that evictions for our members, and I believe there are some landlords and property managers on the call, it really is kind of a last resort for us. It's time consuming and it's costly. It does not benefit us to get someone out of an apartment, and sometimes it's hard for us to fill that apartment once they're gone. So it really is a last resort, and what we want to do is make sure that we can work to pass this rental assistance program by using some of the CARES funds so that anybody can access it. We want to expand it to not just low-income folks. We know there aren't enough resources there for the low-income community, but we also want to make sure that working families have access to it too, because we have a concern for that as well as we move into the next couple of months. So other than that, we just want to make sure we're working together and that we are all focused on the same thing. The Pennsylvania Apartment Association is working with Phyllis and the rest of the team to make sure that we are also getting co-sponsors for Senator Killian's bill. We approached Representative Jordan Harris to work on this with us as well. He agreed, and I believe Representative Austin Davis also has a proposal. So we really are making a great team, a bipartisan team, and we expect to have something done in the near term. So we're just kind of waiting to see what the package will look like from PA, and we'll move on from there. That's it for me.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Leah. All right, so again, we're asking people to join us in telling the story of the impact that rental assistance can have and will have on stabilizing low-income renters and the community. Senator Killian has a bill to create a state rental assistance program. And as I already said, there is a potential funding source, which is the Coronavirus Relief Fund, which was created by the Federal CARES Act. What we're going to spend the remainder of our time today talking about is what is some of the data around the need. For people who work with low-income households, we generally know that there's a great need, but Andrea is going to walk us through some of the data that she's been compiling about unemployment claims, impact on low-income households. So Andrea, I will hand it over to you.
Great, thanks, Phyllis. Just 1 second for me to share my screen, everyone. Okay. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Andrea Menino, Senior Advisor, Policy and Practice at the Housing Alliance. As Phyllis said, I'll briefly discuss some of the data which are the reasons why we need dedicated rental assistance in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. So let's look at the big picture. So last week, the Bureau of Labor Statistics released its highly anticipated jobs report for April. One reason why it was highly anticipated is that the March report sample period was the week before most of the stay-at-home orders were enacted, so it didn't capture what that latter half of March included. So nationally, we're seeing an unemployment rate of 14.7%, which is very staggeringly high. During the Great Recession of 2008, 2009, that reached a peak of unemployment of 9.9%. So if you want some comparison there. And to Leah's point, if this is not the true number, if there are still people not reporting that they're looking for jobs, the jobs loss numbers in the coming months could be quite staggering. So this April number is very significant. Like I said, it is higher than the unemployment rate during the Great Recession, and the April over the month decline is the largest in history of the total, what they call non-farm payroll unemployment, and brought unemployment to its lowest level since January of 2011. So bringing employment, to its lowest level since January 2011. The series goes back to 1939. And then job losses in April were widespread, as everyone knows. As for Pennsylvania, as of today, 1,836,715 people have applied for unemployment compensation since March 15th. To put this into another perspective, this is 14% of our overall state population. On this slide, we have high-level industry groupings and the average salary for each, ordered by lowest average salary at the top to highest average salary at the bottom. Also from that jobs report from April, job losses in April were widespread, with the largest employment decline occurring in leisure and hospitality. In April, employment in leisure and hospitality plummeted by 7.7 million, or 47%. So just think about that. Almost half of all leisure and hospitality jobs were lost in that month. Almost 3/4 of that decrease occurred in the food and service drinking places industry. Again, 3/4 of all of those jobs are gone for the month. So if you look at this, that report, that April jobs report, and this chart in front of you, you're seeing that the highest job loss is also in the sectors with the lowest average salaries, meaning the industries that are hardest hit have the highest number of low-wage workers. Now let's look at the economic condition of renter households before the COVID-19 pandemic. We have 4 income categories captured here. I'm going to explain them in case you're unfamiliar with them. We have extremely low income households that have incomes at or below 30% of the area median income, or you'll hear people hear them call it AMI. In Pennsylvania, this equates to approximately $25,500 for a family of 4. $25,000 for a family of 4. Think about that. Very low income households make a little bit more than that, between 30% and 50% of the area median income. 50% of the area median income is roughly $43,000 for a family in 4 Pennsylvania. And then low income households have incomes between 50% and 80% of the area median income. 80% of the area median income in Pennsylvania is just over $68,000 for a family of 4. And then all other households with incomes above 80% of the area median income. So we can look at this pie piece by pie piece. In Pennsylvania, 28% of all renter households have extremely low incomes. Remember, that's $25,000, $26,000 annual income for a family of 4, as compared to 7% of all owner-occupied households. We can also look at this in total. In total, 68% of renter households have low income, very low income, or extremely low income, compared to 33% of owner-occupied households. This then brings us to the concept of housing cost burden. Cost-burdened households pay more than 30% of their income, and severely cost-burdened households pay more than 50% of their income for housing expenses, including rent, mortgage, utilities, and other related fees and taxes. So those living in cost-burdened or severely cost-burdened housing may have difficulty affording other necessities such as medical care, food, clothing, and transportation. So when we look at housing cost burden in total, 43% of all renters are housing cost burdened, with a little over half of those being severely housing cost burdened. When we look at extremely low income renters, again, those living at or below 30% of the area median income, or $25,000, $26,000 for a family of four, we see that 74% of them are housing cost burdened, with most of that 74% being severely housing cost burdened, meaning they pay 50% or more of their income to housing expenses. So now we're going to pivot to the landlord perspective. Remember, if renters can't pay their rent, landlords don't have money to pay their bills related to the property or the ability to invest money back into the property. This means they could be unable to provide regular maintenance and necessary repairs. Through all of this, so what we dug into is we found that most single family rentals and small building rentals, so buildings with 2 to 4 units in them, are owned by individual investors. So individual investors own a little less than half of all rental units in the country. Individual investors own more than 3/4 of single family rentals and small building rentals with 2 to 4 units. To also understand what landlords are facing in regards to the COVID-19 pandemic, the Housing Alliance issued a survey in early April to landlords. We had over 200 landlords respond to the survey. In the survey, we asked landlords what their short-term financial concerns were, and the top 3 were not getting the same amount of revenue this year as last year, not meeting their own financial obligations, and disruption of services by partners or contractors. We also asked what their short-term needs were, which I thought were very thoughtful. They wanted information for their tenants on resources that they can apply to. They needed some deadline changes and extensions for payments, and increased and new financial resources so they might meet the increased costs that will arise. This is all I'll dive into from the survey for now, which was a relatively brief survey, but if you have more questions about it, please reach out to us after the webinar. So this slide is meant to be a jumble. It's meant to be a long list and just a lot on it for visual purposes. And so this is where we're going to get into our rental need, and we're going to actually develop this more in written format after this webinar, as we're still putting information together. So we're trying to, as I just stepped through all the slides of what are the reasons that we need dedicated rental assistance in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Some might suggest using other CARES Act related funding, including Community Development Block Grants, or CDBG, Emergency Solutions Grant, or ESG, and Housings for Person with AIDS, also called HOPWA, for emergency rental assistance and other housing needs. We fully support if the community needs those funds for rental assistance to use those funds. However, there are dozens of other community programs and needs these funds can be used for. Some of these uses include dealing specifically with addressing issues directly related to COVID-19, including medical testing, medical equipment, supplies, and social distancing. Other uses of these funds include, in response to COVID-19, also include meal delivery to those who are getting medical care or being socially distanced, and small business support to help prevent layoffs. So far, Pennsylvania and its communities have been awarded over $200 million in these funds, and we anticipate in the next rounds of funds being released that Pennsylvania will see approximately $500 million of these funds. So after factoring in these funds and the fact that they have several other important uses, and the many things that we just stepped through in the prior slides, even if every dollar of all of those funds were used for rental assistance, we don't think it would be enough to cover the extent of the rental need that will come about now, that exists now, and will come about in the coming months, as Leah mentioned. So as I said, this is just a big list to illustrate the many factors that show dedicated rental assistance is needed. In summary, these include the economic factors that were facing renters before the COVID-19 pandemic, the high unemployment that we are experiencing now, especially in low-wage industries, that not all job seekers are eligible for unemployment compensation. The potential length of time expected for the economy to recover. On the Bureau of Labor Statistics website, it has this, I don't know if it's great, but for data people like us, it's an interesting chart that shows unemployment over the last several decades. And you can see after the recession 2008, it took the economy roughly 7-ish years to get back to the same unemployment levels, which were low unemployment levels that the country experienced before the recession hit. We don't know what that economic recovery will look like, but we don't think as the second stay-at-home orders are lifted, that all the jobs are going to immediately come back. Many landlords use the rent received to cover their mortgage, utility, and repairs for the property. Without rent, they risk not making their financial obligations, and again, not making necessary repairs to their properties. And as we all know, the eviction moratorium does not waive rent due. Rent is still going to be due for all of these households. So in summary, rental assistance is the most direct way to alleviate the economic pressure for landlords and tenants. Rental assistance to help tenants pay their rent and to help landlords meet their own obligations should be a priority in decisions to support the economic recovery. Both tenants and landlords stand to lose a lot in this economic crisis created by the pandemic, and we need to support both groups. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Gail Schwartz, who will dive more into rental assistance. Gail, you are on mute.
Am I off of mute?
You are off of mute.
Okay. Are you seeing my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Oh. To go all the way to the beginning. Okay. Here we go. So the impact of rental assistance, and really we see rental assistance having a double impact because it not only saves homes and families, but it really does save businesses, especially small businesses. Rental assistance, really can help prevent families from experiencing the trauma of eviction and potential homelessness. A couple of years ago, there was a book put out by a researcher, Matthew Desmond, that really highlighted all of the trauma and negative impacts that eviction can cause on households and can cause on the community. And eviction is not something that just negatively impacts tenants. There's also very real impacts to landlords as well. Research put out last year studying evictions in Richmond found that evictions really cost about $5,000 for the landlords. And those are not costs that are ever completely recuperated at any point. So it really does have some very, very serious business consequences for landlords. So for those who may not be familiar with rental assistance, we just want to do some quick level setting. Rental assistance is actually a fairly broad intervention, and it has very many different models that can be a single sort of light touch singular intervention all the way to a lasting intervention. So when we go to the sort of lighter touch intervention, at one end of the continuum, that is eviction prevention. Oftentimes, we see this as being, a one-time cash injection that is meant to address arrears, and it's really ideal for households that have a reasonable expectation of stability going forward. And also, just to back up real quick, generally the way all rental assistance programs work is that they are initiated by a tenant who is experiencing a need. they initiate contact with a service provider. That service provider determines eligibility. Once that eligibility has been verified, the service provider, the tenant, and the landlord enter into agreement, which results in a financial payment being paid directly from the service provider to the landlord. So again, there's a really sort of lightest touch, one-time assistance that typically is seen as eviction prevention. You know, say a household experienced job loss, but they quickly found another one, or a big medical bill, or the car broke down, something like that, you know, again, there's a reasonable expectation that they can be stable going forward, but they just can't quite cover the debt. Great for them. The sort of mid-range rental assistance program is time-limited rental assistance. So again, this can be used to pay arrears that might have amounted from an inability to pay rent, and is used to stabilize current housing. It also can be used to help a household move to a more sustainable housing opportunity. Maybe there was a change in the household makeup, you know, due to a divorce or a death of a family member, and so people are just, you know, not making as much money as they used to, and you know, they need to move to a more affordable option, anything like that. What we tend to see with these types of rental assistance programs is there is a short-term case management component, and oftentimes a unit inspection component as well. An example of this is, you know, the rapid rehousing program that is run through the homelessness service system. And then sort of the last example of rental assistance is that deep subsidy lasting rental assistance. And by deep subsidy, I mean that tenants, no matter what their income are, they're only paying 30% of that income. There's usually no time limit on how long the assistance is given, though there usually is regular recertification to ensure that people still meet the income eligibility for these programs. And so the example of that would be, you know, the Housing Choice Voucher Program, or also known as Section 8. There's also a similar program, again, run through the homelessness system, that is called Permanent Supportive Housing. That does have a case management component to it. Housing Choice Voucher Program typically does not, but all of these programs, again, have regular recertification of the tenants, and usually have regular rental inspections as well. So what have we learned from recent rental assistance proposals? We're seeing, you know, lots of models coming out from different communities, different states across the United States. We see here that in Delaware, they've been able to provide just, you know, quick rental assistance up to $1,500. And again, these are payments that are made directly to property owners, to utility companies. New Jersey, what they did is they expanded on their existing infrastructure to adapt it to the realities of COVID-19. So, you know, they put some modifications to what the income determination is. You know, can these folks prove that they weren't able to pay rent as a result of COVID-19? Also, you know, extending it to be aligned with the state of emergency. And then also what we're seeing is in Montana, again, they're looking for folks who really struggled from the outset, that they were had an inability to pay rent in April and May, that there's likely to be a continued inability to make rent. and they are looking to pay the difference between 30% of the household income and any eligible costs. So it is kind of that deep subsidy assistance for up to $2,000. So again, one of the things that we're seeing, the Urban Institute did a really great analysis of all of these programs that are coming out. And what we're seeing, some of the trends are, states are really leveraging where the existing infrastructure to deploy resources is already, and just improving it and adapting it to meet the challenges of COVID-19 specifically. We're really wanting to see folks maximize flexibility. Housing crisis can get very, very nuanced quickly. Families are unique, as well as landlords and rental businesses are unique as well. So flexibility is really important. Really want to determine and focus resources to the greatest unmet need, and of course always continue to be advocating for more. So next we have a poll, and we just want to know how many folks on the phone are already doing this work. Do you administer, operate, or work with a local rental assistance program? And Stacy, I am going to ask you to share the results of this one once we get there.
Sounds good. It's rolling.
Yeah.
We've got about half of our audience so far, but people are still voting, so we'll give them a second.
Great.
All right, let's see what we have.
Great. So many of you already are working with these programs or running these programs. So we already have this really great infrastructure in place in Pennsylvania to help get these resources to the folks that need it the most. So, summary of why we need rental assistance. One of the things that we know, besides all of the, amazing data points that Andrea just discussed, is we also know that even though some families are accessing some programs like unemployment, they could also be experiencing new costs or prioritizing other basic needs such as food, healthcare, childcare, and others that really are impacting a person's ability, a household's ability, a family's ability to make rent. As people are getting laid off, they may have to COBRA their healthcare. People who were counting on childcare and maybe returning to work, but now they have to pay a babysitter because schools and summer programs are being impacted. So there's just lots of hidden cost drivers all throughout communities that are really impacting families. And the other issue is that right now, the current system of rental assistance is not designed to meet the unique challenges of the pandemic. So we know a lot of the eviction prevention programs that are already out there really do require that proof of literal homelessness or proof of an immediate eviction, which nobody has right now because there is that stay on evictions. But we know we need to get that rental assistance to those families as soon as possible. So there are some changes that need to be made. Again, programs do require inspections. This was already a deterrent before the pandemic, but we really want to make sure that people are able to access high quality housing opportunities and make sure that the owners and managers of those programs also feel safe and that we're not creating any additional or unnecessary close contact between folks. And also, again, even before this crisis happened, our current system was insufficient at meeting the needs of all the housing crisis in Pennsylvania before the pandemic. So we do have some ground to make up in that space. So when reaching out to legislators, we do have some helpful hints for you. We encourage folks to call the Harrisburg office. Again, we want you to speak to the staffer or person who works on housing policy. Sometimes you get directed to constituent services, and those are, great people to speak to and really helpful, but because this is really about a specific piece of legislation, we want to make sure we're talking to the policy person versus the service and helper person. If you can, make it personal. Use your own story or stories about the impact on your organization and the work that you're doing. It really, really helps communicate the need when it's, the person sharing their own story. We also suggest, having notes handy to reference. Sometimes these conversations can be a little bit nerve-wracking, and I know I always have notes handy whenever I make these calls, and I make these calls a fair amount. And then, of course, if you ever are asked a question that you don't know the answer of, all you have to do is let us know, and the Housing Alliance will happily follow up with any legislative office to address any questions or concerns at all. Again, also, if you happen to know somebody who works in the office, relationships matter. It's always good to talk to somebody that you have worked with in the past. And then I have another poll. So this is just to sort of help with our follow-up advocacy. We're not going to look at the results of these polls, but this just allows me to catch your name and see if you need some help connecting on who your representatives are, and also follow up with you. So our first question is, do you know who your legislators are?
We're at about 60%. I know we can get that a little bit higher. It's okay if you don't, be honest.
Right? We're here to help you figure all of that out. This is what we do.
Absolutely. All right, we're holding steady at around 70. I'll close it down.
Okay. And then our next question is, do you have a relationship with your legislator? Again, relationships are helpful. Even if you don't have a relationship with the legislator themselves, having a relationship with somebody in the office is also really, really important. And again, if you're somebody who really wants to build relationships with your elected officials, the Housing Alliance is here to support you and help you in achieving that if you want that.
Okay.
All right. We got one more for you. We like our polls. All right. And the last poll is, I plan to call my legislator in support of this rental assistance program. Can you help us make those phone calls? We have scripts, we have letter templates, we have talking points. Also, you have me. I am totally available to all of you, not at the same time, but to all of you if you ever want to do a dry run on how to have these phone conversations. I am happy to do some script reading with you, anything like that. So again, we cannot stress this enough, that your membership is, what makes the Housing Alliance so impactful, and we are here to support you in any way as you help us advocate for this critical resource.
Okay, great. 81% yes.
Awesome. And then there are also other ways to engage besides making a phone call. We do want to do an organizational sign-on. We are always looking for people who are willing to speak to the media. And again, we would work with you on preparing you for any interviews with a reporter, talking points, anything like that, and doing the legwork to make those connections. We are also looking for folks who would be interested in doing an op-ed or a letter to the editor, getting something in print in your local newspaper, talking about how impactful this resource would be for the people that you serve, for the communities that you live in, maybe for yourself personally. You know, getting connected to those folks with lived experience is also incredibly powerful. We don't just want executive directors and frontline staff talking about this. It's also really important that we create space for the people who are experiencing the need to be able to express their hardship and empower them to ask for this resource as well. We are also looking to do a blog series, again, talking about that local need for rental assistance and really hearing from the front line, from the communities, what is it like out there, and how can this resource really help you all get through this pandemic and this crisis and be stable for the long term, well through recovery and beyond. So another poll for you, for all of you on the phone. We want to know, do you want to stay engaged in the campaign? And again, as you can see, there are many different ways for you to be engaged in this campaign, and we are happy to work with you in whatever way that we can.
All right, 93% yes.
93% yes. That's pretty awesome, guys. Thank you. And with that, I'm going to pass it back over to Phyllis.
Great, thanks. Gail, will you stop sharing your screen too? So thanks, Leah and Andrea and Gail, for all of that really great information. What we really wanted to do today is give you some information that you can use in telling the story about why we need rental assistance. But at the end of the day, it's actually not really about fancy talking points, although, you know, we have those too. As I said earlier, all we really are trying to do here is to connect all of you across the state to each other to say the same thing. So the Housing Alliance's network is fairly diverse. By partnering with the Pennsylvania Apartment Association, we're telling a more comprehensive story about the impact of rental assistance on a number of groups, mostly tenants and landlords. And this is really about you telling the story of what's happening in your community and why rental assistance will make a difference. One of the reasons that Gail asked you if you operate or administer a rental assistance program is because, number one, we want to be able to use your stories of how the rental assistance works. We are really focused on making sure that we are helping households that will be impacted by COVID-19. But we also know that there's quite a few data sources and research that show that rental assistance and affordable housing overall really stabilizes families. It helps people get and keep a job. It helps people with disabilities have the stability that they need. It helps people with health conditions take their medications. It really just overall stabilizes families. And I think those are also really important points We didn't mention that today because we've been more focused on preventing evictions, meeting immediate need. But I think the story of how rental assistance stabilizes families and communities is also really important. Before we take questions, I want to just talk a little bit about what we would also like to do with you in the future. So, hold on, wrong slide. Did I go back? I went backwards too. Let's see. There we go. Again, we're focused on the impacts of COVID-19. We know that the impacts are really big right now. We're concerned about what's going to happen in the next few months, given the number of people who are unemployed and the fact that jobs will not come back quickly. And it might be that jobs will not come back in the same numbers for quite some time. We know, though, that people at low incomes struggled before. We know that with the COVID-19 pandemic, that there are a lot of people that were not able to stay home, that had to go to work and put themselves at risk. And this is a chart that the Philadelphia Inquirer published recently. It has data for all of Pennsylvania. And what it shows is that a quarter of Pennsylvania workers who were defined as essential in this crisis make less than $30,000 annually. And then you'll also see the number who make less than the state's median household income. We hope that the impact of this pandemic will also help us change the conversation on the people who we all rely on, in this case, who we're relying on to keep us safe, and whether or not they have what they need to have a quality life. We will be seeking your input into our policy priorities in the future, but now we really want to stay focused on advocating in the next few days and week to create a rental assistance program to help address the very negative consequences of COVID-19. Thanks to everybody for submitting your information via poll. Gail and others at the Housing Alliance will be following up in the next few days. And we want to take a few minutes to answer any questions that you have. If you have a question, please type it into the Q&A box. And I will start with the first question, which is, does Senator Killian's bill have a bill number? It does not yet have a bill number because it has not yet been introduced. What Senator Killian has done is to issue what's called a co-sponsor memo. A co-sponsor memo is a memo to his colleagues asking them to join him by co-sponsoring the bill that he intends to introduce. We will send a link to the co-sponsorship memo out in the materials that we send out after this call. The next question is, universal basic income has been tested in several countries. To my knowledge, all of these programs were successful. Does anyone know if universal basic income is on the table in Washington, D.C.? I don't know whether or not it has been proposed, and I don't know if anyone else on the webinar today can answer that. But what I would say is that it doesn't seem to be an issue that has been taken up by both political parties. And for that reason, it may not be a proposal that will move in Congress. The next question is, will rental assistance be taxable to the recipient? The details of the rental assistance program are still being worked out. And also in follow-up to today's call, we will send out a survey to ask people if you have any thoughts or input into how you think the rental assistance program should work. But what I will say in answer to this question is that generally rental assistance is paid directly to a landlord and it is not taxable. The next question is then, what is the application for funding? That is also a really important question, but not something that has yet been worked out. And again, some of the details are really important, and we'll send out information for how you can weigh in on some of those details. The next question is, does the fair appropriations proposal from a couple days ago include or prioritize rental assistance? I don't know the answer because I'm not sure what you're referring to. So when we send out the information again after the webinar that will include the recording, we will find out the answer to that question. Then the next question is, do you have a one-pager available with the information shared? We will send out the PowerPoint. We will send out additional materials after the call. The next question, Leah, is for you and us. The first part of the question is can you share what your mission is, and then also how do people get assistance from the apartment association?
Sure. Our mission is to basically educate, empower, and advocate on behalf of our owners and their residents. And primarily advocate, though. That's kind of the biggest thing that we do. We did put together a rental assistance fund. It's kind of a COVID fund through the apartment association that our members could contribute to. And then our intent is, once we have a significant amount of funds available, we would then give them to a charitable organization who can do the contributions directly.
Great. And the Housing Alliance, our mission is to increase access to safe, decent, and affordable homes with a focus on low-income households. And while all of our work is intended to support low-income households, the work that we do tends to focus on supporting the affordable housing and homeless services sector to have the resources that you need to serve more people. And so in terms of our daily work, I think in some ways the work of the Housing Alliance and the work of the Apartment Association can seem really different, but on this issue and on many issues, we really have a lot in common because we're seeking to stabilize the rental housing market, which includes both tenants and landlords. The next question, Leah, I'd like to ask you if you could answer. So this question is about the eviction moratorium. And the question is, as far as the moratorium is concerned, I understand that evictions cannot take place, but will it protect or prevent tenants from accruing daily late rent fees? And can landlords charge daily fees or late fees in the meantime?
Yes, so the answer to that is we had advocated as an association for evictions to be for us to prohibit evictions based on non-payment right now due to COVID. The governor's executive order went a step further and prohibited all evictions, but because of health and safety issues, I think that they're going to make some adjustments to that. So stand by, there'll be some more information on that in the future. During this time though, and this is the unfortunate thing, and why we are so concerned about getting rental assistance passed, during this time, landlords are going to enforce the whole rent thing. So if someone's not paying, they're getting further and further in arrears, and it's going to be impossible for them to get out of that. And the reason that the landlord has to do that is for all the reasons we talked about. A lot of our landlords are large employers as well. So they employ maintenance technicians, leasing agents, security in some cases, and the governor has made us responsible for making sure that we keep those people employed, particularly right now, because our maintenance guys are responsible for cleaning up common areas, as well as going in with professional help to clean up apartments where someone's known to have COVID. So that's part of what we do. But the other reason is because the owners really, what we figured out, only take home about 9 cents on the dollar, which, you know, is not that significant in some cases, and it is just kind of a marginal profit. So as a result, we will continue to charge rent. We have recommended to our members that during this time, they waive late fees and other fees. Again, that's a recommendation. It has not been a mandate, and it's not a mandate under the governor's proposal.
Thanks, Leah. And one of our participants is pointing out that housing authorities are not allowed to charge late fees during this time. We didn't mention, and some people may know or may not know, that there is an eviction moratorium in place at the federal level that applies to only some types of housing. And there are additional rules and regulations that housing authorities have to follow. So at least for housing authority tenants, they will not be accruing late fees during this time. Thanks for that clarification.
Well, and I would add too, Phyllis, that for our members who receive any kind of federal loans and mortgages, they have to adhere to those same rules and regulations.
Thanks, Leah. Then there's a question about a bill by Senator Brown from Ohio. What we didn't talk about today is the continued effort at the federal level to include emergency rental assistance and other housing supports and services in the next bill that we understand Congress is hoping to move forward, that would provide additional relief to states and communities. So people may or may not be familiar, but there have been 4 bills that have been passed at the federal level. And as I said, there's work to pass a 5th bill. There is a proposal at the federal level for $100 billion in emergency rental assistance, which has been included in the Democrats' bill. So we don't know where it will go, but that is an effort at the federal level, and we definitely encourage people to weigh in with your federal members of Congress to make sure that we have more emergency rental assistance available at the federal level. The next question is, do we know how much funding will be included in Senator Killian's bill? We do not have that detail. So normally we would have all worked out all the details on this policy proposal before proposing it. But given timing and given how we had to start talking about the need to include rental assistance in Pennsylvania's economic recovery, every detail has not yet been worked out. We have been working with Senator Killian, Senator Haywood, and others on the details, but they're not. It has not yet been decided. All really important questions that we just can't quite answer yet. The next question is, does the moratorium on eviction protect someone from eviction who gave a notice of intent to vacate and cannot find housing due to COVID-19? Leah, you're nodding. Is that a question you can answer?
Yes. Right now, the moratorium on evictions through the state of Pennsylvania is all evictions. So if that person can't find housing, they gave their notice and they can't leave, they cannot be evicted right now.
Thanks. Then the next question is, are utility companies waiving late fees during COVID-19? There is a moratorium on utility shutoffs. It is tied to the state of emergency. As long as we are in a state of emergency in Pennsylvania, utilities cannot be shut off. I cannot speak to whether utility companies are waiving late fees. Can anyone else, Leah, Gail, or Andrea, do you know the answer to that? we'll follow up. I believe the answer is no, but I am not 100% certain. So we'll follow up on that. Then another question is, can landlords increase rent in terms of a regular yearly increase during COVID-19? Leah, can you answer that?
Yep. So the answer is yes, they can. We have recommended to our members that they don't. But again, it's not a mandate, but we have recommended to them that during this time, as they go into renewing their leases, that they are not imposing increases right now.
Thanks. Then the next question is from a community action agency representative. And the question is, what are thoughts on the best way to determine the amount per household for assistance? And do you have any stats per county on average rental costs? We do have stats per county on average rental cost, and we can also send that out with the materials. And what I would say about the best way to determine the amount per household, it really varies by program. And in terms of this rental assistance program, again, it hasn't been determined. Can anyone else speak to the best way to determine the amount per household? That might be some additional information we can follow up on. Okay.
Sorry. I would say that there's the HUD guidance with fair market rents. That is what most rental assistance programs are using as guidance for developing the amount of resource. And then, so that puts a cap on what the rent the program can pay. And then it really does vary from the program as to whether or not the recipient or the tenant has to put some money towards. So housing choice voucher programs or deep subsidy programs, the tenant pays 30% of their income. Things like rapid rehousing, which is that short-term rental assistance at the very beginning, they usually don't have to pay any money towards rent, but as the program progresses and people are getting ready to graduate from the program, they have to pay more and more to ensure that they're actually going to be able to make rent after supports step away. So it can vary.
Thanks, Gail.
Hey, Phyllis, I'm sorry to do this, but I do have to jump on another call. But again, it's been a pleasure to work with all of you, and we look forward to achieving rental assistance in the state together. So if there's any questions or anyone needs to reach out to me, feel free to go through Phyllis, and I look forward to it. So thank you.
Thanks, Leah.
Thanks, everybody.
All right, we just have a few more questions. So one question is if evictions are still occurring, as in if landlords are ignoring the moratorium, what should we do, or who can we advise the tenant to contact? Gail, is that a question you could answer?
Yeah, so I mean, you could contact legal services in your community and have them get involved. You can also contact the state attorney general's office and file a complaint against that landlord because they are in violation of the governor's order, and that does fall under the jurisdiction of the attorney general. So those are the two places that I would start.
Great. Well, I want to say thank you to everybody for being with us today. As I already said, Gail or someone else from the Housing Alliance will be following up. We know that a lot of things are uncertain, but we also know that by working together, we really can raise attention to the issue of rental assistance and make it a priority in our state. And all the advocacy that we do at the Housing Alliance, it's only effective when we work with you locally. So thank you for your continued work, and thank you for working with us to make sure that low-income households have more of what they need, and our work together is so important so that we can prevent more people from losing their home because of eviction. So thank you, everyone, and reach out if you have additional questions or need anything from us here at the Housing Alliance. Thank you.